wanted to use the chance to thank my advisors, Dr. Anyla Beqa and Dr. For their continuous support, and Professor Dr. Bowen for his patient guidance during the capstone class. The agenda for today will be, I'll start introducing my problem statement and the goals that my project had. I will continue with the background of the research on the Kosovo scale, proceeding with the research question and the two hypotheses I've built upon my background, the methodology used for this project, the results and the recommendations. And basically the recommendations will be presented together with the results so that it directly shows the impact, how main findings lead to concrete recommendations. And I will conclude with the future research suggestions that relate to my topic. So the problem statement is the gender participation gap among the public and the private sector of Kosovo. Basically, this is a problem, the unemployment problem is a problem that Kosovo has, but this is a more specific problem that if you go further into the data, you see the discrepancy between males and females in terms of public and private sector. So there were two goals that I had when I started to research on this project. The first, there were in fact to identify the influence that two factors might have. The first one was the law on labor, and especially the maternity leave factor, and the second was the lack of capital by women and their limited access to the credit market. So the background of the research, I went to different data that the Kosovo Statistical Agency published, and basically they show that the employment rate by gender in general in Kosovo is high. So the total employment rate is 25.6% of the total working population that we have. From that, we see that just 40% of males are currently employed, whereas we have a 10.7% of females that are that basically are part of the employment rate. However, if we go deeper into analysis, we see that there is a huge discrepancy among the public and the private sector. So here, basically, you will have sectors which are predominantly part of the public one. You have health and social work, the education. From the perspective of the employee, we see that, let's say 17.2% of females are part of the health and social work, whereas only 4.9% of this sector is dominated by males. When it comes to education, again, 21.3% is female, whereas 9.6% is male. And this difference is not only evident on the employee perspective, but also on the employer's perspective, from the employer's perspective. Now, on the public sector, we have women working on government, mainly on administrative positions, being 42.7% of them. Different NGOs, different local enterprises and organizations, whereas the males have 28% of that. Usually, you also see that males usually account for more managerial and executive positions in the public sector, whereas women tend to have kind of different lower positions. In the private sector, there is a completely different story. You see 50.5% of males, work on the private sector, whereas this sector is dominated by females only by 35.8%. So the idea of the study was not only just to research the data and see, but also to really understand what explains this gender gap. And going through the literature review and talking with different experts on the field. I'm sorry for this technical. I don't know why slides are going through the research, you see that the law on labor and maternity leave is a law that is basically created with a purpose to have adequate rights for the employer and the employee as well, and basically to ensure equity among the labor sector in Kosovo. However, this law in many instances was discussed, and it turned out to be a bit problematic. The formula that they use for the maternity leave is 6 plus 3 plus 3. Basically, the 6th first month when the woman is on maternity leave, the employer would pay for their salary. Then for the next 3 months, the government would pay for their salary. Whereas you can also take another 3 months without pay if you want. The research says that usually the private sector is the one that is discriminating on this, because Kosovo doesn't have a law on protection of the workplace. So basically, the public sector has that room to kind of discriminate in terms of setting conditions, let's say, for the woman to work in different, let's say, positions, or setting conditions to lower their maternity leave, no matter how the law is, or no matter the payment that they are guaranteed. So this might be, let's say, one of the factors that through the research I found out. The other one was the ownership and the access to the credit market. So in general, Kosovo has this cultural and value belief, which says that usually males are the ones that inherit the property of the family. Now this has directly led to these statistics in Kosovo. So only 8% of the women own land in Kosovo. Only 11% of the businesses are owned by the women in Kosovo, and the rumors say that, in fact, this number is 3%. 8% of the businesses are businesses of the businessmen who have, in fact, registered their businesses in the name of their wives. And only 3% of commercial loans go to women. So basically, 97% all go to men. Now, all this research background and this information had led me to 2 questions. Is maternity leave really affecting the gender gap participation rate? And is the lack of ownership and access to credit market affecting the gender gap participation rate? From which I derived these hypotheses. So the first one being that the maternity leave really does affect the gender gap participation rate, the null being that there is no relationship among the 2 variables. And the other one, that the lack of ownership and access to credit market does affect the gender gap participation rate, and the alternative being that basically there is no relationship among the gender gap participation rate and the access to the credit market. Now, to test my hypothesis, I've used, as they call, the triangular method. So I've used the document analysis, the research, the survey, and the interviews. The document analysis was basically done on the position paper on maternity leave that was done by the American Chamber of Commerce in Kosovo. This is an institution that highly protects the interests of the private sector of Kosovo, different businesses here. And also the Kosovo framework for gender equality, the gender profile of Kosovo, study conducted by the Sweden Embassy. The surveys were also conducted among 72 women of Kosovo, mainly those working in Pristina, which might be a limitation of my study, and I further suggest this to continue and search for municipal level. Each survey contained 20 questions of different questions, around 10 of them regarding the law and that on maternity leave, and then 10 of them regarding the lack of ownership. And then the interviews with experts on the field, including Kirdina Busia from the Agency on Gender Equality of the PM's office, Leonora Sedmani from Agency on Gender Equity, but the Legislation Department from the PM's office, and Ayanta Nova, the Credit Risk Manager from the CAP Bank in Kosovo. My main findings are really related to my recommendations. I decided to start by giving you a general idea on my main findings and the characteristics of the people that I have surveyed and interviewed, and then I will continue by presenting my top recommendations backed up with the results that I find. So as you can see from this graph, from all the women that were surveyed, most of them work on the public sector, which is the second one. Most of the women that are married also work on the public sector, and most of the women that do have, or at least indicate that they have at least one child, are part of the public sector. So basically, all these indicators, which might lead to the requirement of the maternity leave, do lead to the fact that women it might be a factor affecting women's choices to work in the public versus the private sector. Now, one of the questions was on the survey was, were you paid according to the law on labor? So basically, the law on labor guarantees 70% payment on the 6 months of a basic salary to be made by the employer to the employee. Another 3 months are to be paid by the government, 50% of the basic salary of the employee, and another 3 months without pay. In general, the women responded that, in general, they were all paid according to the law. However, we see a higher number, let's say 2 people who responded that, who were part of the private sector, but who responded that they were not paid according to the law. The reasons behind were usually, let's say, the employer required, can I pay you not 70% but 60%, or is it okay if I give you not a monthly salary but a total at the end, or conditions like that, which basically are not according to the law and the rights that this law guarantees to women. Another important question was, have you incurred any additional condition apart from the law set by your employer while you were on the maternity leave? Now, while 26% of these women that work on the public sector said that they were at least set a condition, 74%, which was a bit surprising and a lot, indicated that 74% of the private sector said that they were at least once set a condition by the employer. So when I had the interview with the woman from the PM's office, they also claimed that it is not the law that is discriminating itself. It is usually the businesses who in fact abuse with the law. And it is not the large businesses who have really high profits, let's say, but it's usually the informal economy who in most instances do not even register the employees, and it is also small businesses who really work on low profit and set these kind of conditionalities. As such, my first top recommendation would be to improve and implement legal enforcement and compliance mechanisms with the law, because the law obviously is not discriminating women itself. It is just a situation that is going on, and probably the economic situation of our private sector, who cannot comply with the law. Now, it is important, what would we gain from this if we improve the legal enforcement? First, if we increase this, let's say, supervision among both the public and the private sector, we would see that, we would basically be able to control a more effective enforcement of the law. And then we would also have more reliable and accurate data directly from the field. So people and, let's say, policymakers would be able to gain data directly from the field and have that signal that if it is necessary to change the law, then where to touch it, where is the problem. We really lack studies in this case. We will, in the further slides, we will see how they started to amend the law, but there is no actually any publishment or research done regarding that, so that is a concern as well. The second recommendation, and how did it arrive? The other question on the survey was, would you share your maternity leave with your husband? A really new thing, and it's kind of hard to comply with our culture, but it has started. And when you ask women, most of them respond that they are willing to share their maternity leave with their husband. You just see that, let's say, women on the public sector that of age 51 to 60 usually hesitate to do that. In general, women over 40 years old hesitate to do that. So in interviews, I was also discussing this, and they say it is no surprise, because in Kosovo there is this tendency to believe that women are the one that should take care of their child, and women are the one who know better how to do the child care job. So our culture is in a way or that leading to that. But It is important that usually the young generation, as it responded, is willing now to share their maternity leave in a way or another. I mean, in a months or another with their husband. I mentioned before the amendment of the law. According to the PM's office representative, the law has already started to be amended, not in terms of introducing the paternity leave, but in terms of reducing the whole maternity leave. And what I found out going through the research is that there might be a contradiction if you change the law, because there is a childcare institution policy in Kosovo. For all public childcare institutions, the eligibility criteria for the children to be accepted is that they should be more than 1 year old. So if you basically decrease the maternity leave and make it less than 1 year, then you're creating two contradictory laws with each other. And here we are trying to rather regulate and support women on the labor market rather than, in a way or another, indirectly discriminate them. So I tend to believe that we should be really careful, and my recommendation to the PM's office and all policymakers would be to be really careful when we amend the law and to really regulate the childcare system in a way or another that it would be complementary to this change in the law. Also, the introduction of paternity leave will help women share responsibilities with their spouse, and will also create kind of more equal perception when it comes to from the employer perspective in terms of how women and men are standing in the labor market position. Third recommendation: develop national action plans for employment. I really liked it. I think it's very important for Kosovo. How come in a country where we have 35% unemployment, 40% unemployment for female, we don't have a national action plan for employment? Like even countries such as Sweden, Canada, Norway, who have a really low level of unemployment, do have such kind of action plans. I do believe that it is really important to implement in Kosovo. There is no such plan existing from the Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare, who is responsible to do that. The Agency on Gender Equity, which is part of the PM's office, already created a strategy called the Women's Economic Empowerment, but no budget was allocated from the Ministry of Finance toward this strategy, so this strategy couldn't be implemented. Now what we also see lately happening, especially after the war in Kosovo, is the economic development investment from the government basically going toward a lot towards infrastructure. Of course, that is important from a country coming right after the war. However, such investments really tend to benefit the male laborers because males are the one who dominate in the construction sector, in the energy, in the supply one. So basically, these are the category of the labor participants who are benefiting from these investments coming from the government. And my top fourth recommendation is to development of new credit lines from commercial banks. So what I've seen from the research is that women who were surveyed, most of them do not apply for credits. However, there were 13 women who have from the private sector. There were 13 women from the public sector who have applied for loan, and 5 from them were refused the loan. There were around 13 women from the private sector who have applied for loan. None of them was refused for loan. Now, is this discriminating? I talked to the credit risk manager from the Tag Bank, and he said that usually banks do not discriminate based on gender, ethnicity, background. It's not what banks care about. They usually, what they seek is a good potential candidate for loan, the one that would be able to comply with the rules of the bank says, and basically to return the loan. However, the results show that here the socioeconomic conditions of women do discriminate them. Until lately, and not to say even further, Kosovo has been following the Kanun of Legugajine, which doesn't recognize women as heirs as well. So only the males are the heir of the family, and they inherit the complete capital of the family. And this is directly discriminating women, because in order to apply for a credit, for a commercial loan, you basically have to present some kind of collateral, either land or any type of capital, especially in the larger amounts. Now, what we see is usually women taking loans in really small amount, and these loans are not used for investment. Usually they are used to pay, let's say, the school or university for their kids, or to pay for their house, or so they are not used for investment purposes. The only investment that we have seen in the last years coming from women is usually on these beauty salons, on the services such as doctors giving services. So it is not an investment or production business capacity, which generates high profits. We have seen also the women from Kruša Armada, who has started to work on traditional foods, basically to generate some kind of profit for their own, but this is not even comparable with the profits that businessmen get in Kosovo. So the development of new lines of credit from commercial banks would definitely benefit all of us, not just women, because women are human capital and resource as well. And if we're not using that resource in our country, then we're definitely not being economically efficient. So it is important to stimulate them, because the more women are able to get loans, the more they would be able to invest in the business environment in Kosovo. And basically the banks would benefit from that as well. Now, one thing that surprised me is that the central bank supervises all the commercial banks here in Kosovo, and usually, of course, they work for their own interest. However, they said that when they create policies, these banks do not even mention gender problems. So policies are completely, this gender issue is completely left outside. Additional recommendations of mine would include encouraging municipal level development programs. This would help women to know more about the local needs and what the businesses of these municipalities are requiring. The specialization, let's say, would be more, let's say, localized, and basically both the women but also the business sector would benefit from it. Another important point is to increase the research done on the gender gap. Here includes not just the correlation between factors, but also the cause and effect. So we want to see not what just what I've presented today, but also what is causing what, and what is the effect of that. So that is really important when you want to make changes on the laws and on the rules and the policies that your country has. And the last but not least, I believe that the increased campaign awareness among both males and females is really important, because that would not only benefit the females, but would benefit our entire society. In conclusion, my hypothesis, both of them are proven true, and we see that the law on labor is creating difficulties for businesses and for women job choices. Policymakers still kind of supported the existing law by saying that the law is not discriminating itself. However, we see that the law is indirectly disfavoring the position of women in the labor market. And as regards to the lack of ownership, affects the investment, and that is directly affecting their access to the credit market and basically their movement from the public towards the private sector. Different issues here include the lack of knowledge about the inheritance law, traditional values and beliefs that we have, lack of financial support for women, different channels that I mentioned, and also a deprived tax system, meaning that even if women want to register their property on their own name, they have to go and pay different fees and different taxes and fees of services in order to do that. So usually the economic condition of these families who have such problems really limit women on that. My further research suggestions would be to have a study with a larger sample size and a more diversified one, either from the regional perspective, from the ethnic or background perspective, different focus groups it really helps to get a bit closer to the reality out there and see what is the main problem. Also, as I said, the research beyond the correlation, so basically looking at the cause and effect relationship among the variables. And different research on other issues, such as women working position. Do they have managerial, executive power? What kind of position do they have? A payment gap, which unfortunately is not a problem just in Kosovo, but it's really discussed right throughout the entire world today. And I think all these issues are worth investigating and coming up with policies and laws to change the situation. Once again, I want to thank all of you for your attention, and if you have any kind of comment, question, critique, feel free to address that. Thank you.
Could you go back to your chart at the beginning that showed the percentages?
You're taking this one?
No, it was what I thought you were saying is that a certain percentage of the employees were male and a certain percentage were female.
I think this one. Or here.
But, no, go down one.
This?
Right.
Okay.
I thought you were saying that, for example, in the public sector, 42% of the employees are female and 20% are male. But it doesn't add up to 100%. So I must not understand the percentages that you're working with.
Okay. So this is for the employer perspective. So only women who are employer on that sector include a total of 42.7%. And compared to that, there is 28% of males working as employer on the sector. So there are other workers as well. It doesn't have to be a complete of 100%. I don't know if I.
So they're
addressed that
supervisory employees? Is that what you're saying?
Excuse me?
These are supervisory employees?
Well, as it is defined on the labor statistic analysis that they provide, employer is generally the highest rank is the supervisor.
One other comment on one of the later charts, you asked at the point where you asked whether women would be willing to share their maternity leave with their husbands, with males. You included, if I can see from here properly, individuals in the 40+ age bracket. In fact, that would be a very different question for a woman who was 25 years old and a woman who is 50 years old. Why did you not limit that question to women of likely childbearing age?
Well, because I think it is important to see the reality from our entire population and how it is evolving. During the interview said that, usually women they don't want to share their, let's say their maternity leave with their husband because they have this tendency to believe that they are better at taking care of children. But this thing is changing, and I think that clearly kind of shows that women of that age still are kind of prone to to believe that it's more important for them to take care of the child, whereas if you go to the younger ages, that is a different story. Usually, these women from, let's say, 20 to 30, 31 to 40 are the ones that are going to continue and work, whereas these women from 41 to 50 are women who already usually have a kid and have completed their family planning and are about to go on pension as well. So you really see that a discrepancy in terms of cultural belief and thinking. I think it's important to show it in this context and how it relates to the recommendation as well.
Can you explain, Neil, why the situation sort of in the old Federation of Yugoslavia, was everyone getting the sort of maternity leave that we've been looking at this morning? And then you have 6 months and then 3 months and then you have further 3 months. Was this
How was that
typical
before?
across all of Yugoslavia?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that. No. However, this has been the case for relatively a short period of time in here. Usually the women, with the increase in the representation of women in the parliament, they kind of work towards that in terms of increasing the maternity leave. Now is the private sector who is pushing towards the change. I'm not sure if that was the case in the time of ex-Yugoslavia, but now I tend to believe that now we have a stronger private sector and business sector who might be pushing towards that. So I'm not sure of the data, but it might be.
The rationale behind all this is a post-conflict rationale. It wasn't like this before 99.
I don't know.
You talk a lot, about the law on maternity leave. What about the law on women's property rights? Were you able to spend any more time on that?
Yeah, sure. It's very well regulated. It guarantees all the rights that women should have. It even goes into detail on what happens after the marriage, what happens if you divorce, what happens if your husband dies, let's say, what happens with your kid, and if you want to continue and give that capital that you have for your children, things like that. So basically the law is very well regulated. One problem was the taxes and the fees that you have for services. So if you want to put, let's say, your property in your own name, register, you have to go through different service fees and taxes to pay. That was an issue that women were concerned about. And also this general belief. There was a survey done in 2011 by the UNDP when they asked women, how do you feel about getting, the capital from your own family? And then in fact, 64% of them said that they were bullied when they wanted to get their share, and they would better prefer not to do that and have this better relationship with their male relative, their brother and other male relatives, rather than have their own share of that.
Would you say then that most women would prefer not to go to the court to have their rights in order to maintain peace in the family? Is that what's happening?
That's what the survey said. 64% of them would not do that. And that is I think that there is more of a cultural issue here. And the system that we were part of, and the code of society, rather than the law. The law